Perhaps I can start where Dr. Fraser left off with his question. Who really are the respondents? Who are the people who should be there first to a scene of disaster? I think that's what he basically asking. Now, perhaps there is some coincidence in the question posed by Candy this morning and an initiative that I took this week as a member of the Parliament and asked. And I want to say a serious injustice was done to the country this week, because I, in fact, attempted to discuss this disaster matter in the Parliament. And there was an occasion on which the Prime Minister was quite inaccurate in the information that he was given to the Parliament and to the country. And I asked him to give way so that I could clarify the issue in the interest of the country. And in a bizarre manner, the Speaker of the House stood up and stated emphatically to the Prime Minister, he must not give way. He will not allow the Prime Minister to give way so that I can speak and give the clarification. And I think the country was the poorer for it. Now, I want to take some time while I argue that way, Dr. Fraser. And it's not an I-man statement, but I just want to establish my authority to be able to speak on this subject. I have had the privilege, and I want to say that there are not very many of us who have had that privilege in St. Vincent, to be very formally trained in disaster preparation and in search and rescue. I did this with the Barbados Regiment. I did this with the Jamaica Defense Force. I had the privilege to go on to Canada with the Canadian Regiment to do this, with the Venezuela Institute of Defense, and then on to Japan to study disaster. And beyond that, I had the hands-on experience of being the officer in charge of the 1979 eruption of disaster fire, when some 20,000 people had to be evacuated. I will not count the several fires and other activities I've been involved here. I can cite the names of people like Gordon Olivier, a former fire chief who was on programs of training with myself, and Colonel Croft, who went to Japan with me, and who was a former deputy of the Antigua Defense Force and is now still in security and intelligence training work in the region. Now, a critical question we have to ask is, when we have a disaster, who responds? How immediate is that response? Who is in control? I therefore ask in the Parliament this week that same question. Do we have in St. Vincent and the Grenadines a force response unit? What is the command and control structure? Who gives these orders? And can we in fact attend to more than one incident or accident at the same time? And I did this on the basis of the last experience we had when the rains came here. Now let me say something that I find cynical, and I don't want to stretch this out, but it's the truth. I find in St. Vincent very often when we have announcements that we're going to get rain, flood, or whatever, nothing happens. And almost on every occasion that we have been affected, there has been little or no publication or announcement. I just said that as a general statement that I find as a contradiction. Almost on all of the occasions when something happens, there was no announcement. And when there is one, we almost have nothing at all. That may be mere coincidence. The fact is, however, on the last occasion when we had the floods here, at about 6:20 that morning, I got a call from Miss Norma Nanton. I can call her name, I have her permission, that she has had trouble in her area, that dirt and other things had come down on the kitchen, and that she had been shaken up in the night and she was in danger of losing life, and she had elderly people there. I called at the home of the disaster coordinator. To his credit, I was told that he was already on the job, and I had to acknowledge that. I was quite impressed. But when I got to the constituency and I saw that incident, I then proceeded to other areas of the constituency and started calling back into Nemo information. Now, as it is, all the information that I had to call back into Nemo had to be directed to Mr. Hurricane. Now, I find that problematic because he cannot afford to be chief cook and bottle washer, that if he's not in office, then you have to get him on the mobile away in the constituency. I want to stay with the Norma Nanton incident because after lunch when Norma was continuing to apprise me of the danger that was in, and when I called him, Mr. Prince's response is that they now had a major catastrophe at hand in the Prospect area, and they could not respond to Norma Nanton. So that I found very alarming, because certainly there must have been many other Norma Nantons in the country at this time who are being affected. And it speaks to the question that is being asked here this morning. If and truly we have several incidents happening in St. Vincent, how are we going to respond? Now, the reason why I asked the question this week in the Parliament is that I am of the firm view that there ought to be in the country a unit of force respondents comprised of elements from the Special Services Unit, the Coast Guard Services, the Fire Services, the Cadet Force, the Red Cross, and technical people from the Ministry of Transport and Works. And these people are to be uniformed and identified in force response units. If you look at television when you see a disaster, you see people in these sort of orange uniforms that go there. And on the scenes of incidents, they do not function as cadets, firemen, SSU, Coast Guard, whatever. They function as people who are dealing with search and rescue. Those functions of security and law and order and all those things still remain the responsibility of the respective agencies. In other words, there ought to be a sensitivity that there is a type of work called search and rescue in relation to search and disasters that must be a specialization. And my position is that when a disaster of any type takes place, these people must fall in at a command center, be it at the central police station or the police stations across the country for which they must be transported, or to the NEMA office. And they must report to an officer who must be in charge. And that takes me back to the question that when we discussed the disaster bill in the Parliament, I was of the view that whereas it was in order to have a civilian chairperson to be in charge of the unit, that there might have been a benefit to have a military or paramilitary person in second in command or in control, either at the operational level or the policy making level, so that those diversity of experiences could be brought to bear on the situation. This is not happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and it is a serious problem that has to be addressed. I mean, Candy's letter this morning speaks about a lot of disasters that we are postponing. Nobody, for example, wants to speak about the drains in Kingston. I don't think it needs rain to come more than half an hour for Kingston to be flooded. The question of the problem with sea level, and I'm not putting this problem at present administration because it is something that they've inherited from the past, but we have to deal with those flood problems, you know. Now, how do we, as a nation, address matters when we have serious issues like this taking place? Now, Candy makes the point, and I want to say this to Mr. Howie Prince that is listening. Nobody wants to get at him, because I think he works physically hard. But Howie can't be the person who gives the weather bulletin. He can't be the person who is speaking about the latest incident on the scene. He cannot be the person who's taking the calls in the office. He cannot be the receptionist. He cannot be the operator. And too often you get in the impression of how he functions, that he's an extension of the Prime Minister. All things to all people and all places. You must be in all photo op opportunities. And that is not a disaster. You have to delegate responsibility to various functionaries in order that you must be effective. And I'm saying that this is something that one has to be extremely concerned about. Now, Candy in the summary makes some very important observations, all of which I agree with. Because I think I said on this program before, I recall going to Japan when I was there for a study tour. And something that struck me is one Sunday morning, when the sirens of the city in Nagoya went off, I had to get up, along with the family with which I was living, to learn Japanese culture, and go to the city center. And there at the city center, they separated men from women. The women had to go and know what they had to do in terms of disaster, because when you have Japanese winter, which are very severe, fire is a very regular incident, and the men went another way. Each person, each gender had to know what is their role, and children had to know what is their role in disaster. And this is the drill for the village. And this brings us to the fact that you are not going to succeed in St. Vincent and the Grenadines with disaster preparation until we have a culture of preparation that speaks to the issue. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines needs to understand that this is in fact a disaster waiting to happen, because we are not addressing the matter in the way that we ought to be attending to. Now, this week in the Parliament, the Prime Minister misled the nation when he attempted to give the impression one more time, and I regret that I have to be political, but it must be said, that disaster preparation never existed before his government came into being. As if we didn't have people like Mr. Cupid, who was there in the disaster office, and many others who worked before. I can speak with from experience that when I was at Vinlet for some 11 years as the officer in charge of disaster preparation, we worked assiduously with people like Mr. Claudius Harry and Mr. Latchman, who was the Special Service Unit then, gave his contribution as a fire officer as well. And there are documents on record for the Vinlet, for disaster preparation. I'm citing this out as an example. For example, the receptionists, they know in a disaster they have to function as cooks. to prepare for the lines people. They know where vehicles have to be positioned, what bridges are likely to collapse, where equipment has to be positioned, what has to be done for transmission distribution, for generation, for all of the services, and every person knows what they have to do along with the drills. I believe Water Authority has similar exercises. Perhaps it's the same for cable and wireless. And we have to understand that this thing is something that has to be magnified across the country, that each and every person has to role, not only in terms of booklet forms, but in drills and in preparation. So disaster preparation has some history, but we must have more emphasis on functional and operational efficiency. Now, I think the question was raised this morning as to whether, Randy, you spoke to the fact that whether managers of various entities are on the council. The problem with that, and I don't know to what extent that it has changed. When you do not have a disaster, the managers of many of the authorities, and I'm not making accusations of the people who are serving now, but I'm saying what obtained in the past, be it VINLEC, Water Authority, Cable and Wireless, and all of the various agencies, they feel that they are too busy to go to the preliminary meetings. And in fact, the Prime Minister himself often did not show up in some of those meetings. Everybody acted. But when the real thing happens, the real people come out with little or no history of the continuity of what was being discussed prior to the exercise taking place, because nobody feels it will ever happen. It is an unnecessary evil to which they must give up their time and effort when they could be busy doing something else. But national disaster is critical. It can wipe out all decades of work in the twinkle of an eye. And you can't have serious economic planning unless you attach it to your disaster preparation and your ability. So merely putting up an edifice and naming officers doesn't ensure that the nation is any better prepared. And the time is nigh where we must in fact move expeditiously to having here a force response unit to deal with various types of disasters. It could be a serious car crash on the street, 4, 5, or 6 street vehicles caught up. Do we have jaws of that equipment to open vehicles to get people out? Who are the people who are on the scene at the time? Is it just simply the fire department? Is it just the hospital? Is it just the cadets for mass casualty operation? How are these things triggered? Who takes charge? Who gives the orders? Who press the bells? Who press the buttons? I'm saying these things are not yet at the level that we should be in the year 2008. And therefore, this discussion this morning is one that is important for us in trying to resolve the state of readiness of the small nation state, and that all of us must make the contribution that we can make to help to ensure that we have a disaster. Finally, I think, Agent, you raised the question, and it's a hard question to ask because you shudder to think of what is the outcome. But if you go into a scene of a disaster, force respondents and search and rescue people will know how to search. If you go to a building that has collapsed, you have to know whether it's a pancake collapse. You have to know if it's a V collapse. You have to know whether it's a lean-to collapse. You have to know how to mark an area to indicate that that area has been searched. You have to know how to identify an area to know if oxygen is being received there, so that you prevent people from having to go over and over the same thing, so that people know systematically how you address a matter of search and rescue, first of all for life and limb, before you deal with matters of inconvenience. And clearly in the last disaster situation here, what was done was we attempted to address inconvenience, and after the fact, the question of life and limb became important. And that tells you, in no uncertain terms, that we are a long, long way off from being ready to deal with disasters, and in any event, to deal with more than one catastrophic event in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, if it ever happens. I don't want to thank you for the little length of time in speaking to this matter this morning.
Thank you, sir.
It's a matter for which I have very deep concern, and which led me bringing it to the Parliament of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because I've been looking at disasters happening over and over again. As a matter of fact, one thing that is, in Central Kingstown, at one time, I had to position wheelbarrows, pickaxe, cutlass, hose, all things. Every community in this area, in this country, ought to have disaster teams and equipment of a minimal level positioned and placed until heavier help can come to the situation. And there are World Bank assistance for doing those things. We are not doing those things. We are talking, and we're just trying to do one upon the other. But every life